She smiled when she sent it. That was the part that cut the deepest. Not the words themselves, but the smile. The easy, unbothered smile of a woman who had never once been told that she was wrong about anything that mattered. She leaned close, looked the black nanny directly in the eyes, and said it slowly, like she was explaining something obvious to someone who should have already known. Black nannies don't marry men like him, sweetheart. They serve. And when they're no longer needed, they leave. Then she walked away, heels clicking against marble, Chanel bag swinging on her arm, laughing softly to herself. She was so certain. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the most dangerous man in Los Angeles had cameras in every room of that house. He watched the footage that same night, alone, in silence. And something shifted behind those cold, unreadable eyes of his. Something that no business rival, no enemy, no one in his entire life had ever managed to move. This black woman, who asked for nothing, demanded nothing, and held herself together with nothing but 2 seconds and a steady breath, had just become the only person in his world he could not stop thinking about. And the ex-wife who laughed in that kitchen had just made the most catastrophic mistake of her perfectly curated life. Because 6 months later, she would receive an envelope at a wedding she never expected to attend, with a message written in his handwriting that would make her hands go still. What was inside that envelope, and what he made her face that day, will change everything you think you know about power, love, and what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. She had learned very early in life that certain rooms were not meant for her. Not because anyone had locked the doors. No one needed to. The world had quieter ways of teaching that lesson, in the way eyes moved past you without stopping, in the way voices softened their formality when they spoke to you, in the way a uniform, even an unworn one, could follow a woman like a shadow no matter where she stood. Tiara Simone Watkins understood all of this the way she understood breathing. It required no thought. It simply was. She had come to the mansion on a Tuesday in October, 2 years before any of this began, with a single reference letter folded in her coat pocket, and the kind of stillness in her face that people sometimes mistook for coldness, and others, the more perceptive ones, recognized immediately as discipline. The housekeeper who interviewed her asked 3 questions. Tiara answered all 3 without hesitation. She was hired before the afternoon was over. The mansion sat in the hills of Bel-Air like a secret the city was keeping from itself. White stone and black glass, surrounded by gardens so perfectly maintained they looked artificial, though nothing about them was. Inside, everything moved on a precise and unspoken schedule. The staff knew their corridors, the chefs knew their hours, and Tiara knew her room, small, clean, at the far end of the east wing, with a single window that caught the morning light at exactly the right angle if you were awake early enough to see it. She was always awake early enough. The child's name was Junho, 5 years old, dark-eyed and serious in the way that small children sometimes are when they have absorbed more silence than laughter in their short lives. He did not trust easily. He tested her for the first 3 weeks, hiding his shoes, refusing meals, waking at 2 in the morning and simply sitting upright in bed, saying nothing, waiting to see what she would do. What she did was sit beside him, not speaking, not performing comfort, simply present, the way a steady thing is present, until he decided on his own that she was safe. After that, he followed her everywhere. The boy's father was a different matter entirely. Kwon Seo-jun moved through his own home the way weather moves. You felt him before you saw him, and by the time he had passed, something in the air had shifted. He was not cruel. Tiara had worked in houses where cruelty lived in the walls, soaked into the furniture, and she knew its particular texture. This was not that. Seo-jun was simply a man who had spent so long inside a world that rewarded distance that warmth had become for him a foreign language he understood theoretically but never spoke. He acknowledged her the way he acknowledged all the staff. Briefly, correctly, without real attention. She expected nothing more. She had not come for attention. She had come because Junho needed someone, and she was good at being what children needed. That was the whole of it. That was enough. And yet, there are moments in a life that announce nothing. They carry no weight when they happen. A shared glance across a kitchen at 6 in the morning. A cup of coffee prepared the exact right way and left without explanation. A question asked so quietly, it might have been intended for the air and not for her at all. These were not events. They were weather. Small, unremarkable, easily forgotten. Except that Tiara noticed, the way she noticed everything, that he had started arriving in the kitchen before his schedule required it. That he had begun saying her name, her actual name, where before there had only been silence or the vague collective noun of staff. That on the night Junho's fever broke at 3 in the morning and she had been awake for 9 hours without complaint, Seo-jun had stood in the doorway of his son's room for a long moment, looking not at the child, but at her. She had pretended not to see. Pretending, too, was something she had learned early. What neither of them had calculated, what no one in that house had thought to account for, was that some things, once noticed, cannot be unnoticed. That stillness, sustained long enough in the presence of another person's stillness, eventually becomes something else entirely. And somewhere in the east wing of a mansion in Bel-Air, in a small room with a window that caught the light just right, a woman who had been taught her whole life that certain rooms were not meant for her was beginning, quietly and without permission, to disagree. 14:11. The morning Brittany Caldwell walked through the front doors of the mansion without calling ahead, the house knew before anyone said a word. It was the particular quality of the silence that changed first. The way the housekeeper's movements became slightly more deliberate. The way the kitchen staff found reasons to occupy themselves with tasks that required their backs to the corridor. A house that runs on precision develops its own nervous system over time, and every nerve in that building fired the moment her heels clicked against the marble entrance. Tiara was returning from the market when she saw her. She had taken the back entrance, as she always did, arms full with Junho's groceries, the specific cereal he tolerated, the yogurt he would only eat if it was the peach flavor, the apples she would cut into the shape of small rabbits because he had once laughed at that and she had never stopped. She was moving through the service corridor toward the kitchen when she heard the voice first, before she saw the face. It was the kind of voice that had never been told no by anyone it considered worth impressing. "Where is he? Don't make me ask twice." Tiara set the bags down on the kitchen counter quietly. She began unpacking. She did not turn around. And then the voice was behind her, closer now, and she understood without looking that it had decided she was an appropriate target for the frustration that the absent Seo-jun could not yet receive. "You're the nanny?" She turned then, slowly, fully, without apology. Brittany Caldwell was exactly what the house had always been before Tiara arrived. Beautiful in the way that required maintenance, polished in the way that required expense, and carrying in the set of her jaw the specific confidence of a woman who had never once been made to feel that her presence was anything less than the point of the room. She looked at Tiara the way people look at furniture they are considering replacing. 2 years, Brittany said, after Tiara confirmed it. The word sat in her mouth like something faintly amusing. You must be good at cleaning up messes. Tiara said nothing. She placed the yogurt in the refrigerator, the peach flavor on the second shelf, where Junho could reach it himself when he wanted to feel independent. And then Brittany stepped closer, and her voice dropped to the register that women use when they want words to land without witnesses. And she said the thing she said. About babas negras, about serving, about knowing one's place in a house that was never going to be hers. And she said it smiling, the way people say the most destructive things, as if the smile retroactively makes the weapon decorative. She left the kitchen with the walk of someone who had just won something. What she did not know, what she could not have known, because it required understanding a man she had never actually understood despite 4 years of marriage, was that Kwon Sejun had cameras in every room of that house. Not because he was suspicious of his staff. Suspicion was too emotional a word for what Sejun practiced. It was architecture. It was the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 separate attempts on his life before the age of 30. The refusal to allow any corner of his world to exist outside his knowledge. He watched the footage that same night. He sat alone in his office, the city spread out below the window like a circuit board of light. And he watched a woman he had been quietly, inconveniently noticing for months, absorb something cruel, with nothing but 2 seconds of wet eyes and a steady breath, and then return to organizing a child's fruit as if the world owed her no acknowledgement of what had just happened to her. He watched it twice. Then he sat very still for a long time, the way he sat when something had moved past the boundary of calculation into something that required a different kind of thinking entirely. In the weeks that followed, the changes were so small that only someone trained in observation would have caught them. He began appearing at the dinner table before Junho called for him. He began directing questions, small ones, logistical ones, about the boy's schedule and preferences, to Tiara directly rather than through the housekeeper. One evening, he found her in the library after Junho was asleep, reading in the chair by the window, and he did not leave. He sat in the chair across from her and opened a folder of documents, and for 2 hours they occupied the same silence. It was Tiara who spoke first. "You'll be in Seoul next week," she said without looking up. "Junho wants to show you the drawing he made before you go. He won't ask, but he wants to." So June looked up from the folder. She was still reading, not performing casualness, simply stating a fact she had noticed and thought he should have. He looked at her for a moment longer than the information required. "I'll ask him in the morning," he said. "He'll pretend it's not a big deal," she said. "It is." The folder closed. He did not reopen it. And in that library, in that silence, something that had been moving slowly and without announcement arrived at a place from which it could not be walked back. Tiara felt it. She kept her eyes on the page. She was very good, still, at pretending not to see. But the page she had been reading, she had not turned it in 40 minutes. The letter took her 3 attempts to write. The first 2 she tore apart before the ink had fully dried. Not because the words were wrong, but because they were too right, too honest in the way that only written things can be, carrying the full weight of what she had not permitted herself to say out loud. She was not a woman who indulged in the luxury of naming things that could not be changed. She had built her life on the discipline of acceptance, on the quiet pragmatism of someone who understood that wanting something did not constitute a claim on it. But the feelings had grown past the borders she had assigned them. She wrote the third letter in the early morning, before the house woke, sitting at the small desk in her room, with the window catching the first gray light of a day she had already decided would be her last in this house. She used simple language. She thanked him for 2 years of fair employment. She said that Junho was extraordinary, and that whoever came next would be fortunate. She said nothing else, because there was nothing else she trusted herself to say without saying everything. She left it on his desk before he arrived in the office. Then she went to make Junho's breakfast, because she was still here until she wasn't, and the boy still needed his apples cut into rabbits. She did not expect him to come to her room that night. She had already begun the quiet arithmetic of departure, which things to pack first, how to explain to Junho in a way that would wound him least, whether the mother in Alabama would be awake late enough to receive a phone call from a daughter who needed, for once, to be the one taken care of. She was mid-thought, sitting on the edge of her bed, still dressed, when the knock came. 3 knocks, unhurried, certain. She opened the door and he was standing in the corridor in his shirt sleeves, no jacket, no armor of formality, holding her letter in his left hand. The fluorescent light of the hallway caught the tattoos on his neck, the dragon, the characters, and made them look like something ancient and unresolved. He held up the letter without speaking. She said, "I think it's the right decision," he said. "I watched the footage from the kitchen." The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges furniture in a room without touching anything. "Sojun," she started. "She said you don't get to have this," he said. His voice had not changed register. It never did. But there was something underneath it now, something that moved the way deep water moves, invisible from the surface, irresistible in its direction. She was wrong. Tiara looked at him for a long moment. The corenchinha at her throat caught the light. Her hands were very still at her sides. "Men like you," she said carefully, "don't end up with women like me. That's not bitterness. That's just the pattern." "I know the pattern," he said. "I built most of it." She said nothing. "I'm asking you to stay," he said. "Not as the nanny." The word landed between them and neither of them moved away from it. What Tiara Simone Watkins did next was something she had almost never done in her adult life. She did not calculate the odds. She did not measure the distance between where she stood and where safety was. She did not perform the familiar mathematics of a woman who has learned to want only what she has reasonable certainty of receiving. She looked at him, at the tattoos and the stillness, and the man who had watched her hold herself together in a kitchen, and decided that what he saw there was worth more than everything he had built his world around. And she said, very quietly, "Sujin." Just his name. Nothing else. But the way she said it was the answer. He did not smile. He was not a man who smiled easily, and she already knew this, had already factored it into the specific way she had come to read him, through the quality of his silences, through what his eyes did when Junho laughed, through the 40 minutes he had spent not reading documents in a library chair. She did not need the smile. She could see what was underneath it. In the morning, Junho found them both in the kitchen, Tiara cutting apples, Sojun standing beside her with his coffee, not moving away, not pretending the proximity was accidental. The boy looked at one, then the other, with the particular gravity of a 5-year-old processing new information. Then he climbed onto his stool, picked up an apple rabbit, and ate it in 3 bites. He did not ask questions. Children who have lived inside silence learn quickly to recognize when the silence has changed its nature, when it has stopped being an absence and become, instead, a kind of fullness. This silence was full, and somewhere across the city, in a hotel suite funded by a dwindling divorce settlement, Brittany Caldwell received a message from the housekeeper she had been paying for information for 3 years. She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the marble counter and sat very still, looking at her own reflection in the window. The perfect hair, the careful face, the architecture of a woman who had always known exactly what she was worth, and was only now beginning to suspect that the appraisal had been wrong. She had laughed in that kitchen. She had been so certain. The certainty felt different now, lighter, emptier, like a word repeated so many times it loses its meaning and becomes only sound. She picked up the phone. She dialed Sojun's number. He did not answer. He was reading Junho a story, his voice low and even in the darkened room, while Tiara sat in the corridor outside with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, listening to the sound of a man she loved, learning, one page at a time, how to be soft. The wedding was not announced. In Sojun's world, announcements were invitations, and invitations were vulnerabilities, and he had not survived this long by offering either. What happened instead was that one morning the legal documents were prepared, the garden was quietly arranged, and 50 people received a time and an address with no further explanation. In his circles, that was all that was required. You came because you were summoned. You dressed appropriately because you understood what was at stake. You did not ask questions because men like Sojun did not answer them. Brittany received her invitation through the lawyers. It was framed as a courtesy, a matter of co-parenting optics, of maintaining the civil architecture that custody arrangements required. She read it 3 times in her hotel suite, the city glittering indifferently below her, and she told herself she was going because of Junho. Because it was appropriate, because she was the kind of woman who could walk into any room and own it, regardless of the circumstances that had assembled it. She told herself this until she believed it. She arrived in champagne silk, Chanel on her arm, sunglasses on her head like a crown. Every detail composed, every surface of her immaculate, because she understood, perhaps better than she admitted, that this was the last room she would ever share with Sojun as someone who had once mattered to him, and she intended to be looked at. The garden was extraordinary. White flowers on every surface, the morning light moving through them in a way that felt almost deliberate, almost personal. The small chairs were filled with people who spoke in low voices and did not smile at her when she entered. She found her seat near the back, crossed her ankles, and arranged her face into the expression she wore when she needed the world to believe she was above whatever was happening to her. Then the ceremonialista approached with the envelope. She took it because she did not yet understand what it was. She opened it because that is what you do with envelopes. She read it once, and the words did not immediately assemble into meaning, the way words sometimes refuse to when the mind is protecting itself from what the eyes have already seen. She read it again. Babás negras não se casam. She had said that. She had said it smiling, in a kitchen, to a woman she had dismissed before she had finished looking at her. She had said it as fact, as architecture, as the natural order of things that did not require defense because it had never required defense in any room she had ever occupied. And now it was in his handwriting, returned to her, with a single addition. Today you will carry her veil. She looked up. Sojun was standing at the far end of the garden in a black suit so precisely cut it looked like a statement rather than a garment. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the entrance to the garden, and his face carried the expression she had spent 4 years trying to read, and never fully could. Still, certain, entirely interior. Then Tiara appeared. She came through the garden entrance with the morning light directly behind her. And what happened in that moment was not something Brittany had been prepared for. Not by the housekeeper's reports, not by the months of building herself up against this day, not by anything. Because Tiara Simone Watkins, in white satin, with her shoulders uncovered and white flowers in her black crown of hair, and that thin gold chain at her throat with its small star, was not dressed like a woman trying to belong somewhere she had been told she didn't. She was dressed like a woman who had decided, quietly and without asking permission, that the question had never been worth entertaining. She walked like that too, not performing, not proving, simply arriving. Junho appeared from beside his father and took her hand. He was wearing a white shirt and a small bow tie, and the expression of a child who has decided, with the absolute authority of 5 years old, that this is correct and everything else was the mistake. He walked with her toward his father, one hand in hers, the other swinging freely at his side. Brittany sat with the envelope in her hands. She did not carry the veil. No one came to enforce it. Seo-jun had known she wouldn't. That had never been the point. The point was the envelope. The point was that she would read those words and understand, in the private architecture of her own chest where no performance could reach, exactly what she had done, and exactly what it had cost her. Not him, not Tiara, herself. Because the cruelest ironies are not the ones the world witnesses. They are the ones that happen in the body, in the quiet moment when a woman who built her identity on knowing her own value sits in a garden and realizes that the currency she was counting in has not been legal tender for longer than she knew. The ceremony was brief. The vows were private, words exchanged in voices too low for the guests to hear, which was exactly as Seo-jun intended. What the guests saw was this: a man who had never in living memory been observed letting his guard down, place his hand against a woman's face with a gentleness so uncharacteristic that the 50 people assembled went very still. The way people go still when they witness something they understand is not meant for them, but cannot look away from. What Tiara said to him, only she and Seo-jun would ever know. What he said back made her close her eyes for a moment and press her forehead briefly to his chest, and then straighten and look at him. And the expression on her face was not triumph. It was something older and quieter than triumph. It was the expression of a woman who had spent a lifetime being told that certain rooms were not meant for her, finally understanding that the people doing the telling had simply been afraid of what would happen if she walked in. Brittany left before the papers were signed. She walked to her car with her back straight and her sunglasses down and her Chanel bag on her arm, and she did not look back, because she was a woman who understood the geometry of dignity even when everything else had failed her. She drove back toward the city without music, without calls, without the noise she usually kept running to fill the space where her thoughts lived. In the silence, uninvited and irrefutable, came the memory of a kitchen, of a woman with grocery bags and a thin gold star at her throat, of words she had said, smiling because she had been so certain, so architecturally, foundationally certain, that some things were simply the way things were. She had been wrong. Not about the world. The world she had described was real. It existed. It had teeth and history and rooms of its own that it guarded carefully. She had been wrong about Tiara. She had looked at a woman standing in someone else's kitchen and seen only the kitchen. She had not seen the woman. And the woman, it turned out, had been the only thing in that room that actually mattered. In the mansion garden, Junho ate cake with both hands and got frosting on his bow tie and laughed with his whole body, the way children laugh when they finally feel safe enough to be completely undignified. Tiara laughed with him, her head thrown back, the white flowers shifting in her hair. Seo-jun watched them both with the expression of a man who has spent a long time in cold water and has only now, at this late hour, allowed himself to believe that the shore is real. He reached over and took her hand. She did not look at him. She was still laughing at Junho, but her fingers closed around his immediately, without hesitation. The way you hold something you have already decided you are not letting go of. Outside the garden walls, Los Angeles continued its indifferent, beautiful noise. The hills held their secrets. The city kept its distance. And in a mansion in Bel-Air, in a garden full of white flowers, a woman who had been taught her whole life that certain rooms were not meant for her sat at the head of the table. She had not knocked. She had not apologized. She had not waited for permission. She had simply walked in. And the room, it turned out, had always been hers. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been looked at the way Tiara was looked at in that kitchen? Dismissed before anyone took the time to truly see you. Judged not for who you are, but for where you were standing. And have you ever watched someone who underestimated you finally understand, too late, exactly what they chose not to see? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, karma, and love that refuses to stay in its assigned place, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.